Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the third webinar of IT Leadership, a short course presented by IT Masters on behalf of Charles Sturt University. My name's Guy Coward, and I'm short course MC for IT Masters. Your course mentor is the lovely and talented Brenton Birchmore, of course, who will take over soon. Wherever you're watching this, whether it's now or in the future, we hope you are safe and well, and as prepared as you'd like to be for the upcoming lecture. Thanks as ever to Tip Top Hannah, who is essentially responsible for these short courses and the learn.itmasters.edu.au course website, which is where you'll find all the other materials needed for this course, links to readings and tasks and forums and quizzes, and from next week, the course exam, which we'll talk about next week, so don't send any questions in yet. On questions though, using Zoom for our webinars allows us to encourage you to ask questions, except about exam this week, and the use of chat during these sessions. We ask that you direct all questions relevant to course content to the Q&A section, and that you send all course administration questions to Hannah. You can chat with us directly. We're designated as panelists or to everyone listening along, and you can make that choice by toggling through the drop-down box once you've opened the chat log. We'll have a decent Q&A session at the end of the webinar, decent in terms of length. And I will interrupt Brenton if a question is particularly relevant to the slide deck. Last week, I told you a furphy. I said I wouldn't talk about Charles Sturt University in the live webinars and would record a little marketing spiel. I didn't, which is lucky because apparently and accurately, the marketing for these short courses allow them to happen. It makes these short courses possible. So I'm going to have to do a live spiel. So I'll do it at the end of Brenton's lecture tonight. I'll speak for a couple of minutes about what we're thinking, very briefly about the advantages of studying with us, and Brenton and I'll have a bit of a discussion. And I'll refer you to the Q&A section pretty quickly during my little chat so that we can talk about specifics and your stories and hopefully demonstrate how we can tailor study plans to student objectives. So yeah, feel free through the lecture or at the time to send in your story, and we can talk about it if you're comfortable. Tonight, Brenton's talking about business analysis in IT projects. Again, developed most of the courses and subjects that we do about this. So welcome back, Brenton. How you been? What tales of the week?
Thank you, Guy. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. My week has been kind of exciting. We've gone back to home-based learning for schools here in Singapore. So today was my son's first day back at home-based learning, and it went better than expected. We did not have any technical glitches or anything, but we've been through them before. So that was my big news of the week, but we're all safe and well here.
Oh, good. Wow, so do you do the teaching? That would be surely a huge boon.
Goodness, no. He's in grade 7 in the IB program and a school here. So I try and stay out of that so much as I can. Yes, no, the kind of education I get to do is decidedly purely parental, and I try to not overteach. It's very hard though. I am sure that I am the dad that's always over-explaining stuff.
No.
Yeah, it's true. Sad to say, it's true. It's how it is.
Thank goodness for you. I need a work dad. That's fine.
But I get back lots of brownie points because I'm a gamer with my son. See, so he's 13, and he and I can game together. So I get back my cool points that way.
Good on you.
All right, we have an exciting, jam-packed discussion for everybody tonight. We are going to attempt to demystify and explain the basics of business analysis in approximately 45 minutes. It sounds like a big task, but we don't shy away from those things around here. That's just how we roll. So that's our objective tonight. I'm going to attempt to give you as much of the high-level things as I can. I'm going to go into a tiny bit of detail on a couple of points, and we'll have time for more questions at the end. And I'm hoping that by the end of it, many of you will have a deeper understanding of exactly what business analysis is from an IT leadership perspective. Where does it fit in what IT tries to do? And what would IT leadership need in order to engage effectively with the business analysis function? So a reminder of what the course we're covering, what we've already done is we've done IT service management, we've done IT project management, which is mostly Agile. Tonight, we're going to talk about business analysis. And next week, we're going to talk about governance. That's our final step. And that's the sort of official end of what we're going to do. So tonight, we're going to talk a bit about the fundamentals of what is business analysis. What does it really mean? What does it contain? We're going to talk a bit about what is a business analyst? What do they look like? What do they have to be good at? We will talk about requirements because they are the bread and butter of business analysis. They are the thing that BAs work with on an ongoing basis. So we will clarify what they are, where they come from, and sort of what we do with them. We will also talk a little bit about unified modeling language, and really simple on this. And it's the kind of thing that you could go on for hours. There are many, many dozens of different visual tools, and we're going to talk about 3 of the most popular and most common, probably which many of you will recognize. And we'll talk about what job they do from a BA perspective. Lastly, we will talk a little bit about how the business analysis function might work with projects and IT project management, in particular, a little bit about Agile, because business analysis really evolved out of the waterfall paradigm. It was an answer to what waterfall was struggling with in IT projects. And it still has a role to play, even in Agile being another answer to that problem. So I want to first start with some perhaps familiar diagrams. Many of us have seen these sorts of things before. We've all had a bit of a laugh about it. And these are the different perspectives that can occur that can go horribly wrong when it comes to having a simple request, needing a simple solution, and everyone has their often quite subjective and quite narrow perspective on what that really should be. And this is a simple version. This next one is perhaps a little more complicated, a little more involved, and it's poking fun at some slightly different roles. But there's a lot of validity in where the humor of this comes from, because there really are different perspectives. There really are different ideas of what a requirement should be. What should we be doing here? How do we solve this problem? What is the problem? Or what's the most important part of this problem? And that's probably where this sort of diagram comes from. You can see where the building code is saying, well, this is the important part of the problem. Safety is what matters. And that's not a mistake, because the people who bring that perspective, that's their world, that's their role, that's their obligation, often their KPI. They are expected, required, and need to be allowed to bring that perspective, but not alone. And all of these different perspectives, sorting them all out, deciding what the real truth of the matter is, what the real requirements are, and ensuring that that's what we actually get, which is what we need, that's the business analysis job. That's why we're here. That's what we do. How we do it, we're going to touch on that a little bit over the next few minutes. But from a conceptual point of view, that's what we're here to solve or fix or prevent and avoid. Now, where did it all come from? Well, if you go back a few decades, IT once upon a time, and there was a little bit of humor in the comment that I made in the topic notes, but IT projects were big and expensive and high risk, and there was a lot of wastage. There was a lot of things that went horribly wrong, and IT was often a bit of a hit or miss. Do we get a white elephant, or do we get what we really need? And so the need for being clear about exactly what is it we need and exactly what is it that we're buying evolved into initially technical specifications. So business analysis began more of a way of saying, well, what are the technical specs that we need here? Because at one point, IT solutions weren't as flexible and variable as they are today. So what you bought, you were kind of stuck with to a large extent. And so you really needed to be clear and careful about exactly what you bought. Now that world has changed a little bit because we now have a much more flexible IT environment, but the need to fine tune that, the need to precisely min-max our investment and our reward is even higher, because the competitive advantage that was always part of this paradigm is now razor thin, and everyone is taking advantage of the flexibility of IT. So the role of business analysis to be clear on exactly what do we need, exactly where do we spend our money, and how do we know we get exactly what we asked for, that's just as relevant today. It just works a little differently. And if you think about the way in which IT trends have evolved, has been about some of the way that company trends have changed as well. Company perspectives have changed in recent decades. What matters to the organization? It's how we do things is not as important as what we get at the end. There are more and more ways to achieve things, but it's the result that matters. Having the large capability is more important than specific features. It's meaning that being able to adapt to the changing environment is more important than having fixed rigidity. But we know in IT that there's that endless trade-off where flexibility is usually a trade-off against reliability. The more that you can change, the more that things can change when you don't want them to. And so that trade-off is always a balancing act of priorities. We often have things that are more connected to each other in ways that they weren't 10 years ago. The customer, organizations have recognized the customer is far more powerful than it ever was before. The customers now have the ability to do serious reputational harm to a company that they're not impressed with. And we've seen that happen in social media. The customer is far more potent. So the overall business, the holistic business outcomes, the strategy at the top of the organization has become more important than meeting individual goals of individual departments. So if you have a need to meet the holistic goals of an organization, you need somebody, someone, some role, some mindset that can sit across all of that and still come up with the best balanced answers. You're not going to get that from individuals within any one particular department or category of the organization. So what does a business analyst look at? What are they juggling? What parts of the business are they looking at? It's the POPIT model is an example of a framework that divides the questions up, divides the business. BA looks at the processes. It looks at how things are done. It's not just the tools, but it's how they're used that also matters. This is process, procedure, activities. They're relevant. They need to be looked at. What is the organization? Its structure. How is the authority handled? How is the power distribution? How is the reporting? How is the structure and allocation of resources? That's a question that the BA has to look at. The people themselves, their skills, their motivation, their desires, what people do, what are they good at? What do they want to be good at? And then there's the technology. If you go back 20 years, business analysis was really all about this. It was just the information technology. Now it's all of this, and all of these forces need to be taken into account by someone who sits outside of them sufficiently that they can treat them all fairly, equally, reasonably. That's the balancing act that business analyst, and really only a business analyst role, can effectively do in the modern world. So what are the core principles that a business analyst needs to live by? You're looking for the root causes. We often live in a world of symptoms. We're all aware acutely sometimes of what we feel is wrong. But underneath that is a root cause. And we know that from IT troubleshooting, that there's a difference between the incident or the symptom and the root cause of the problem. BA has a similar problem, a similar goal to look at that differently. And we don't look at just individual technologies. We look at the entire business. And that's why the POPIT model asks us to look at all different attributes and facets of the organization. It means that we're looking at multiple feasible alternatives. What are the realistic options? Yes, there might be an obvious solution, but without a BA to ask the question to say, well, is that the only way to do that? Is that the only option? Or did we just stop looking when we found the one that met enough of the criteria. The BA's role is to double check that and not simply stop when we've got something good enough. Also, to bring common sense to what's reasonable, what's feasible, what makes sense, and carry that through to the point where benefits are ultimately delivered. Also, the BA's job is to negotiate amongst stakeholders that perhaps aren't necessarily good at finding common ground on their own. We've all seen that. We've all experienced that. Stakeholders that have very different perspectives on what a solution to their problem should look like. And it's difficult for them to see a different point of view. So BA has the obligation and the power to negotiate rather than to avoid those problems. Because without a BA, what often happens to those differences of opinion is that sometimes they don't get addressed. And then you get often winners and losers because somebody's voice was heard more than another. And that might not be good for the business. Or worse still, the person who loses, well, it's an ongoing strategy for them, right? They've only just lost that battle. The war is still on, and they'll get their benefits met some other way. They'll hijack the project, or they'll thwart the good efforts later, or they'll still be working to get what they see as a win because they don't yet understand what the middle ground needs to look like. The BA
sure
will deal with that. What's that, Carl?
I sure will, yeah.
Well, it's a sentiment that we've all experienced, right? So, a quick view of the BA process model. We investigate the situation, get the truth of what's going on. We consider the perspectives of all the stakeholders, listen to everybody. No one gets excluded because we don't know how important their input might be until we hear it. So we get all of the forces, all of the influencing factors. We analyze what all the needs are. We find the truth out of what really needs to happen. And then we evaluate all of the options, consider what all the possibilities might be, and then we define the requirements. Now, requirements we're going to go into in a little bit more detail at the moment because they are fundamental, because they come in two different flavors or two different stages. It's a very flexible word and it gets used in multiple different ways. And we're going to talk about two of them. We are talking, of course, about the BABOK, the Business Analysis Body of Knowledge from the IIBA, and their core concept model, which is the BACCM, because we all love our acronyms in this world. So this is what they consider to be a core concept model. These are the things that the BA will wrestle with and balance and judge according to the IIBA, International Institute of Business Analysis. There'll be a transformation of some kind. There'll be some kind of change needed. There will be a reason for that change. There'll be a need, a stimuli, a trigger. There will be something that meets that need, some kind of solution at the end of that change. There will also be stakeholders who will have different interests in what that change should be and what that solution should be. There will be ultimately value that the business will need to enjoy. And that value won't necessarily be defined just by what one team, one stakeholder, one department will enjoy. It will be much bigger than that. Then there's all of the relevant forces and factors that no one stakeholder is going to be able or expected to know and understand, let alone take into account. So this is the model of all the things that the BA is going to have to juggle and deal with. What do they need to be good at to do that? Well, just a few skills. Yeah, just a few little things that the average BA needs to be able to do. Have I said that with sufficient tongue-in-cheek, do you think? I'm going to pause and have a drink while everyone has a look over that list. Often, good BAs are some of the most broadly skilled individuals that would typically get involved in these kind of projects. They don't need to be experts at any one thing other than perhaps diplomacy. They do need to be experts at understanding the modeling that they work with. but they need enough knowledge of everything. They need to know how to work with everybody. They need to know all about what the business is really trying to do. They need to know the business strategy. They need to know all about how to understand the technology enough to know what's going to work and what's not. So it's not a technical function, but it's a breadth function. So they need to know things about the business from a business perspective. They need to understand the strategy of the organization, because that's the goals that the business is trying to achieve. That's the first set of criteria that's going to affect all the big decisions. They need to be able to understand how the organization is making sure of things. How are they checking? How do they need to check? How do they bring certainty? How are the risks being managed? What is the risk profile of the organization? They need to know that before they can effectively make recommendations for solutions at the end of their role. They need to know how we do things around here, the operations, the delivery of services, the engine room of the company. How does it work? How does it really work? Where does the revenue come from? Now you look at this and you say, okay, this is service delivery or the factory floor or whatever, and that's totally different to the sales team. And we know that. And we know that stereotyping the two different departments and the people within that, we know there are gaps. But this is what the business analyst needs to be able to bridge and to understand all the services that we provide, including the IT services that are provided. So there's a lot of things that the BA needs to be able to know, and not know before they get there, but they need to know enough to be able to understand everything that they investigate when they ask all the questions. And that's what the BA does. Asks all the questions and understands and makes sense of the answers that we get.
So Brent,
they also need to be good. Sorry, Guy, you jumping in there?
Yeah, just jumping in. I just have a question. So with the strategy, you sort of talk about understanding the strategy. Is that to say that, you know, there is no scope for the business analyst to influence strategy, or is it sort of their job to sort of come in and say, well, here's the strategy, I'm going to make it happen?
Their starting point is the strategy as defined by the executive. We assume chronologically that the executive has had some informed input into defining that strategy. And yeah, maybe someone like a BA has been useful in informing that decision. But once a strategy has been made, then that's the guideposts, if you like. That's the runway boundaries that the BA is going to begin working with. And if they go through their processes and cannot find solutions, cannot figure out how to do this, then there would be a feedback loop back to the executive to say, you know, this strategy of yours, it's either going to cost you an absolute fortune, or it's going to have to evolve, or you're going to have to make some compromises or sacrifices. So there definitely could be that feedback loop, but that's more of a governance function. Evolving the strategy with informed feedback, that's what governance, well, that's a part of governance. But yes, the BA could well have a role in that, but primarily they're going to start with, well, what can I do within this strategy? Because they're not going to be able to propose solutions that are totally outside of the corporate strategy, not unless they have good reasons and a good business case for that. And that's then going to have to rubber stamp the change to the strategy for that.
Thanks a lot.
But in addition to knowing the business perspective, they're going to need problem-solving skills, the ability to analyze, the ability to be creative, to make decisions, to help others make decisions, to learn new things, new services, new products, new technologies that they didn't know yesterday, but they're going to need to know tomorrow. To solve the problems that come out of it, to understand the interactions between things and the systems and the way things organize complexly, and come up with the new, the conceptual, imagine things that don't exist yet, and try to determine what that would mean and what that would need. And often draw it, illustrate it, model it, which is a little bit of what we're going to talk about in a moment. So this is an idea of what a BA is and does at a high level. This is still at the high level. When we go through the problem solving, I'm going to break it down to something perhaps a little bit more mundane. What does a BA do? First, Well, it's the finding of things. And first we find the mess, right? Because that's usually where we start. Something's not right. And maybe mess is an exaggeration, but we're finding things that aren't quite right. We're finding all the problems, the complaints, the drama, the pain. We then look underneath that. We find the data that determines what's real and what's not, what's bias and what's not, what's subjective and what's not. So first we're finding the anecdotal, then we're finding the evidence. Then we find out what really the problem is. What's really causing this? What are the reasons why? Then we look for ideas as to, well, how do we solve those problems? What are the ideas that might work? Then what would that look like as a solution? And finally, how can we get people to accept that these are the right solutions? These are the right options. Getting people on board, getting buy-in. So that's a much more plain speaking way of describing the role of BA and what it does. All of it is BA. So the cycle, we start with finding out what the pain is. We listen to everybody's complaints. We determine from that what the explicit need should look like. The implied need is, I need to stop this from being my problem. The explicit need is, in that case, you need this to happen. Then we analyze everyone's version of that question and that answer, because there will be conflicts, there'll be uncertainties. That needs to be analyzed, contributing with the evidence that we have, what's really going on. Get everyone's input, because if you miss somebody, their input could be the thing that makes the project successful or a failure. We then make sure that all of the influencing factors have been appropriately taken into account. We determine what certain solutions might bring value. We create and help define a business case, a justification, help the decision makers figure out what's worth it. We then do another set of requirements, which is what is given to the people who are going to deliver on the solution. We'll document those adequately and obviously eventually make sure that it's delivered. Now, it's worth pointing out here that the word requirements is used in this section and is used in this section. So the two-stage or the two perspectives on requirements is, first we want to know what the users want. What are their requirements? First we listen to their complaints, and then we distill that into what ultimately becomes their requirements. Then we have to convert those through a few steps into requirements that can be passed on to people who are going to build an answer, build a solution. And those are worded differently. They look different. They have different parameters, slightly different data within that gets interpreted by someone who's going to deliver. But joining the gaps between the two, that's our job to join. That's our translation. That's what the BA is going to do. Take the requirement that Fred and Mary have as users and translate that into something that someone can actually deliver as a scope of work. So why are we doing all of this? Why are we investing in BA? Well, there's going to be time and money spent on this process. Now, some organizations don't have official BA role. They don't have a person with that title, but they still do the kind of work that we're talking about. They still do the activities. And that activity takes investment. You need to have enough respect for the benefits of that process to be able to invest in somebody going through it to at least some extent, so that all the influencing factors can be considered, so that the business case that gets created can be effectively evaluated. There might be an initial idea. This often happens, right? We've got a problem. Everyone's been talking about it for a while. Everyone kind of thinks they know what's needed. Maybe they've even found a bit of common ground in places, and it's led to a bit of a organically evolved consensus that we probably need this, right? That's probably what we need. And maybe that's right, or maybe it's not. But even if it is right, exactly what specifications are needed, that still needs to be resolved and determined. The details, something that can be measured against whether or not it's been provided. Here from the BABOK is a definition, or the definition, 3 different definitions really, of requirements. So this is the two stages that I want to talk about. Firstly, a condition or capability needed by the stakeholder. That's the users, that's the people that say, I need this in my life. I need this to do my job better. That's one perspective of a requirement. The other perspective is something that must be possessed by the solution to satisfy a component. That's the perspective that you say, that you give to whoever's going to provide it, whether it's being built or whether it's being purchased. Something needs to specify this is what we want as a requirement of the solution. Often this is a translation process from one to the next. The third is merely, okay, so you have a documented version of this, and I'm going to show you a template of what a catalog entry, what a requirements entry might look like, what sort of data fields it will contain. I'll show you that in a little bit. To get all these, we do a process that BA calls elicitation. We elicit the requirements. This is with the users, the stakeholders, the people that are going to benefit. So yeah, we ask a few questions and we take notes, but we do a lot more than that. There are a variety of tools that we will use. We'll do interviews, we'll do workshops, we'll do all sorts of things. But what we really need to get, however we go about gathering these requirements, we want to go through 4 different stages of investigation, 4 different levels. First, we get what everyone knows, and they're ready to tell us. They've probably already told us before we even asked. That's the stuff that they know that they want to tell us. Then there's the things that they know, but they didn't think to mention. Wasn't top of mind for them. The BA is the one that, and not just generally in one pass, often after we've gone and spoken to a few other people, we come back and say, I now want to learn about this because I think this is relevant. This is the unknown knowns. This is the thing that we know, but we don't realize is relevant. Then there's the things that people actually don't know the answer to, but the BA needs to find out. Where do we find out? Sometimes we find out from the data. Sometimes we find from the reports. Sometimes we need to get people to think a bit harder and dig a bit deeper. And then there's the stuff that really nobody knows and nobody thought about and often isn't discovered how important it is until way down the track when it's at the very least expensive and in some cases too late. Now, if you have an agile project, you've got a buffer against that kind of problem. But that one thing, generally, you're never going to get that without some kind of BA mindset, some kind of BA function applied to this problem. If you do get any of these without that, it's kind of lucky, or because you have very clever people and what they're actually doing is filling in what a BA would be contemplating and looking for and finding. Here's the thing that is relevant to us and nobody's mentioned this yet. We need to dig deeper. So what do we use? Yes, we use interviews. We use workshops where, get everybody in a room, let them shout it all out. We observe people working. We observe what people generally do from day to day in the workplace. We might imagine scenarios, factual scenarios about several things that happen, and we might model that, define and describe. But we might also imagine scenarios that don't exist yet. The what if, that's how we do it today. What if we did it differently? What would that look like? What would the consequences of that be? What would the benefits be? Let's imagine that. Let's model that. And it's not an isolated decision. The business analyst will do that modeling and do that analysis and then get the stakeholders in and say, what if this was how your life was? What would that be like? What would be the good? What would be the bad? And we analyze, we investigate, we find out, we get those answers, and we refine what good looks like. And sometimes we're just looking at the spreadsheets. We're looking at the reports and what that tells us, because we'll look at them in a perhaps more neutral way that some of the other stakeholders might have. Now, I've mentioned modeling a couple of times. It's a thing we use to make sure that we are able to visually represent information about what's going on. It allows us to show specifications, shows functionality, shows movement between certain things, visually explaining things. They can show the sequences of events. They can show the relationships between things. They can show dependencies. It's a modified, the unified modeling language is UML 2.0 is the current modern equivalent. We're not going to go through much of it here. Any of you who are curious, just look up UML 2.0 and there's a ton of information that you'll find about it. A requirement as an entry in our catalog is what the need is. A model will define how it works, and the two are both required to fully understand whether or not that requirement is the right one. When you see it functioning in a model, then you can more readily determine whether or not it's actually going to be the complete picture and the right requirement. So it helps determine the value of a bunch of requirements working together. The most common that is used by business analysis is the use case. The use case is, how are you going to use this? It demonstrates dynamic behavior. It will show you how a process works. Many activities that take place can be defined with a use case. It's the simplest model that we can work with. It has only 3 components in it. So it's not like a flow chart or something detailed, an activity thing. We'll talk about them in a moment. But it only has actors, activities, and the relationships between them. So it lets us see what matters to what and what matters to whom. Where are the points of connection? But it's a top-down view. It's an external, it's a helicopter view of something in motion, something that's happening. And each individual activity in it might then have its own activity chart that talks about how that happens in detail, but we summarize it. So here's an example. This is a use case diagram. Now, some of you might be able to quickly guess and see what this is a use case of. Is that popping out to any of you? So it might be. Some of you might be saying, okay, so I can see what that's about now. What are the 3 components? There are the actors, the entities involved. There are the activities that take place, the individual things that occur. That's the oval shapes. And then there's the relationships, the interactions. So that's a very high level view. It's a logical way of saying, well, this does this, talks to this, connects to this. It interacts how? Well, we're not yet worried about the details of how things interact precisely and the yes, no decisions, etc. That's not the level that this particular diagram looks at. That's why it's the most common, because for everything that takes place, you'd have an example of this that says, well, this is how it works. So this is an example of a tool, a visual tool that a business analyst would use to understand what's going on in the business today and would use to model what might happen differently if you had different tools, different processes, different people, different structure. Let's look at another example.
Sorry, Brenton, just to say, well done, Don, Hamilton, Satish, Joseph, Charlo for correctly guessing e-commerce, online shopping, point of sale, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Or as Annie says, click frenzy.
Add to cart.
Oh, I nearly got you to spit water on video. That would have been great.
Yes. Yes. Add to cart. Therapy. Swim lane diagram. It's another particular tool. It does particular things. It has a chronological order. It's effectively showing who's responsible for what at what particular stage of the process. And where does that responsibility get handed off to other people? So you might have a use case diagram and a swim lane diagram that are revealing different things about the exact same scenario. Here is preparing a sales proposal. Right? And this might be a little small for people to read, but it's about preparing what type of proposal is it? Check the manual on that. What kind of template do we start with? This is administrative function. Okay, start with the template. Then it goes to the sales rep to put information in the template. And what do they refer to? And what's the role of the director? Well, their role here is to influence the library of templates that we work with. What's the role of the inside sales manager? To agree on which is the appropriate type of proposal for this particular customer. It tells us what goes before what are the dependencies, what are the sequences, what are the interactions. It's limited, chronological, it's the isolationist thing. It tells us things that is important about this process. An activity diagram. It tells us the sequence of events. It tells us the step-by-step. So we're used to this being a flowchart. We're used to this being step-by-step along the way. So the diamonds are the things that people, yes, no decisions, or maybe multiple decisions. Different things happen. They branch off in different areas. This is a linear. You only take one path depending on the answers to these condition checks that you go through. So this is a flow chart. It's also known as activity diagram. So these are tools that we might have used, and we might use them from time to time to do certain things. These are fundamental tools that business analysis uses a lot. One of the reasons we use them is because requirements are messy, horrible things. They have a bunch of problems associated with them. They're often ambiguous. They'll be duplicated. Fred and Mary will both have a requirement and they'll both get an entry, and we'll need to realize that that's the same thing said twice. Or they might be in conflict. You know, Fred wants it pink, Mary wants it blue. Well, we get them in a room and lock the door until that's resolved, right? They figure that out and now we've got it clear. Some of them are irrelevant, related to things that aren't part of the solution. Some of them are based on assumptions. And when we get those assumptions clarified, we have to go back and clarify the requirement. Some of them are unrealistic, uncertain. Some of them are really subjective, can't be measured. They have all sorts of problems. It's the BA's role to solve all of that as best we can. But if we don't, we have the Duckrabbit. Does anyone know what the Duckrabbit is? Heard of the Duckrabbit? Know what the Duckrabbit is? This is the Duckrabbit.
What do you see first?
What is it, Guy?
It's a Duckrabbit. What do you see first, Gang? Tell us in the chat.
So people will look at this and some people will see the rabbit.
Platypus. Thanks, Aaron.
So whoever said platypus, thank you. You are helping illustrate my point. So some people will see the duck, some people will see the rabbit, some people will see both. It's tongue-in-cheek to say it is a duck rabbit. But whether it's a duck or whether it's a rabbit, the only person who really knows for sure is the BA. So we should ask them. They will know. Because today it's one, tomorrow it's the other. For this requirement, it's a duck. For this requirement, it's a rabbit. Only the BA will know for sure. It's their job to know and figure it out. Here's a quick dip into some of the specificity of requirements.
So, Brenton, would now be a good time for your poll?
Sure, let's have the poll while we think about the duck rabbit. Good idea. We have a poll. We're going to ask you, now that you've all learned a bit more about BA, for most of you perhaps, I'm sure some of you already know a lot of this stuff. What's your view on the role of BAs? It's all anonymous, of course. So you can be as honest as you like here.
Interesting. Heroes, clearly useful, but not always empowered. Sometimes great, sometimes a pain. Not really that useful for us, or they get ignored anyway. They do more harm than good, even when it's not their fault. Thankfully, the latter two, very little traction.
I'm hoping that I have upped the reputation of business analysts worldwide. I'm hoping.
Yeah, it should be on the lobby board for IIBA. Clearly useful, but not always empowered is a very clear winner, far more clear than most other polls, 63%. So that's really interesting and perhaps unsurprising.
So I mentioned early on when we talked about skills and competencies, and I mentioned kind of quickly and tongue-in-cheek that they don't have to be an expert in anything except maybe diplomacy. And that is because BAs have generally all the responsibility, all the expectations, and very little authority. So they're often on a hiding to nothing in trying to get a lot of what they need done to be done. It's tough.
Can it be demoralizing?
It can, but it can also be rewarding and empowering, because often the BA is the most important role standing between success and failure. Even when they're not able to do their job well and properly, the extent to which they can do it is often what makes the difference. So it's a role of astounding leverage when it gets to function even adequately. When it gets to function thoroughly and properly and with respect, it's often the most important job. I would put it in various cases, I would put it above the role of project manager in some instances, or at least equal to the project manager.
And how scalable is that, potential empowerment? It's called a business analyst, but I'm sure I've asked you this in previous BA courses, what about outside of business, governmental level or society analysis,
Absolutely. You might have a company that says, we want to expand into Asia. What's the solution?
Discuss.
Discuss, right? So you would turn to certainly BAs with a different level of skill sets, a different set of parameters, a different scope, but you'd go through the similar process. What are all the problems? What are the objectives? What do we really need? What are the requirements in order to do that? What do we need from a logistics solution? What do we need from an IT solution? What do we need from a staffing and resources and skills solution? That's not IT BA. That's business BA, a strategic business BA. But it's the same ideas, just a different category of business analysis. In this context of this topic, we are talking about it from a much more IT perspective, but absolutely, it can be of the largest scale you can imagine.
Great. There's some good chat in there. Nick H says, Action 1, hire Brenton Birchmore. I hear he's in Singapore.
I happen to be Asia bound, Asia located, yes.
And David is saying we use BAs in government all the time, and I'd be really interested, David, in sort of the extent to which the BAs are able to influence the strategy, and I guess the underlying assumptions that sort of underpin the strategy. So, system change. How good are they at system change and sort of saying there's something fundamentally wrong with what we're doing and how we're doing it and changing that?
Yeah, I think it's a great, fascinating question, because really there's no role that exists currently in most organizations that is better placed. The only role that might do better is something that you'd say just pure seniority. If you just go high enough up the ladder, you'll find a role or a person who's likely to be able to get to the bottom of that. But that's typically not their job. And they probably should be doing other things with their time. And that's why you have some neutral party who's really their only driving force is to get to the bottom of the truth and put aside all agendas. Their role is quite explicitly anti-agenda when it's done properly, and that's really hard thing to do in other roles in any organization.
Or in general, particularly when you're talking about political. The couple of slides ago, the political considerations to not have an agenda.
Yeah, it's not just not have an agenda; it's anti-agenda. It's keep the agendas from damaging the true conversion of investment into value. Because the BA is only answerable to the strategic objectives of the business. They have no silo to work with.
Super cool. Thanks.
So quickly looking at some examples of different requirements. There's business requirements and solution requirements. Business requirements will be things like, well, we needed to operate. We need a solution that'll help our remote workforce. We need a solution that'll work 24/7. We need this to happen for business reasons because that's what our competitors do, and things like that. There will be solution requirements that are more akin to feature requests. If we're talking about a product or a service or something as a solution that's more technical, it's going to need to be able to do this for us. And The functional and non-functional is where we say, well, it's going to need to do this. That's the functional requirement. And this is the extent to which it's going. This is how good it needs to do it. So that's the existence of the function. And then the non-function is, how good does it need to be? The qualitative, descriptive elements. Here's an example of the catalog entry. It's simplistic, right? But this gives you a taste of what sort of things, what sort of data points exist in a requirement. There's obviously identifiers. There is connections to where it came from. Who is the source of this requirement? Who owns it? Not necessarily the same person. Who wrote this also needs to be recorded. So you can cross-reference anything later. What does it connect to? What priority is it? Is it a must-have or is it a nice-to-have? Who are the stakeholders that are relevant to this, that are affected by it? What business area does it come under? Then there's what are the non-functional requirements, what we just talked about? And what is an acceptance criteria? How do we know when this is done? What other requirements does it connect to? Is it dependent upon some other requirement? Is it related to documents somewhere? And why is it here? And then there's change control, the evolution of it. Because they change and evolve over time as we go through the process, they get refined. So we need a way of tracking all of those changes. This brings us to a point of traceability, a quick point on traceability. Now, I'm going to go through an example here. And the example I'm going to use is something that my wife asked me to do a few months ago. And that is put a light in a dark cupboard in the kitchen. Sounds simple, right? I made it more complicated than that for our purposes. State what the requirement is. A light inside the cupboard that activates automatically. Sounds easy. It's got to illuminate everything, sure. And needs to be natural daylight. Huh? Okay. So I go off to the hardware store and I'm looking at the lights available to me. And there's the pink one is really cheap. And there's one that's 15 watts, but there's one that's 5 watts and it's also pretty cheap and it's much easier to install. So that suits me as well. Maybe I'll just get that one. Well, traceability is the thing that says we don't just have a requirement. We have information that says where that requirement came from. Why do these requirements exist? Let's look at the source of this. It needs to come on automatically because people using it will have their hands full. So they can't activate a switch. Okay, I can get with that. I can understand that. It needs to be something that's operated by movement. Sure, I can buy one of them. Anything not well lit might be overlooked and wasted. Okay, so really maybe the 5-watt version isn't going to work because I might save a few dollars on the 5-watt version, but I might waste some food that gets stored in this cupboard because its expiry date passed before we remembered it was there. And we use color-coded labels. Well, of course we do. We use color-coded labels. So that's why it's got to maybe, so pink isn't going to work. Now I know why I'm not going to mess with those parameters of the decision. Or if I just can't get anything but pink, then I can go back to the creator of this requirement and say, there's only pink. What do you want to do?
Do you actually use color-coded labels in your pantry?
I did say I complicated this for the purposes of the example. And the short answer is no.
Okay, good.
Then forwards traceability. How do we test that? Well, I can move my hand, once I've installed it, move my hand around inside, make sure it activates. That's easy, right? I could do the light meter thing. I don't have a light meter. Maybe what I could do instead is hold the label in there and make sure I can read it at all different places. Right, good, that's a substitute test that will do the job. And make sure I can tell the different colors of the labels. So this is what traceability does. This is part of what a BA will produce as part of their catalog. So summarize this, wrap it all up. What do they do? Elicitation, discover what we think we need. We've heard everybody's complaints. We have a life cycle of these requirements where we wash them, rinse them, clarify them, analyze them, and we get at the end, now we know what we need. We know what we need. Then we verify and say, well, is there a business case for this? Right? Is this going to actually viably give us what we want? We know what we need. Can we get it? Do they have that in stock? Can that be provided? If the answer is yes, then we say, okay, so that's what we should have. This is what we know we need. And it's that one, that one there. We can buy that. We can have that, install that. Validation, is it worth it? Does that add up? Is it going to be worth spending it? Are we going to get the benefits? Are we going to get the rewards? All of this are the decisions that the BA will contribute to and will assist to try to get the best decisions out of all of these as we go. So, do we have a problem? Really? Let's look past the complaints and find out, do we really have a problem? Is it worth investing in what BA is going to require to go through and analyze all of this? How bad is that really? What do we need to do to fix it? What kind of solutions would actually fix that? Should we invest in that solution? Is it worthwhile? And once we've got that, how long do we keep it? When do we replace it? When do we upgrade it? When do we do something different? Now, how does this work with Agile? I hear you ask. I'm sure somebody thought that question.
How does this work with Agile?
Yeah, if you haven't thought the question, you have now. Business analysis, as I mentioned before, came out of a way of solving Waterfall's dilemma of what if you plan everything in advance, sometimes with guesswork, and what you get doesn't meet your needs because you didn't understand your needs well enough, or you didn't understand what the technology could do well enough. And so BA was a way of, let's get the whole big picture much clearer than we've ever got it before. And that's worth investing in. Ask all the right questions so that we're really sure on what the solution should be. That's a response to the limitations of Waterfall on IT projects. How does it work in Agile? Well, we know that Agile has all the same decisions, just made in a different order. Some of what BA needs to do is in the beginning, conceptually, to help create the vision document, to help the customer get the clearest idea they can at the beginning of what they should ask for and whether or not that's likely to be feasible. It's nowhere near as deep, but it's a starting point. Then in the iterative development, you have the feedback loop. This is every cycle. You have a feedback loop where there's a BA function that gets involved and brings clarity, certainty, balance, objectivity to that feedback loop every sprint. We talked about the sprints. We talked about that feedback loop last week. And there is a role there in BA to bring that neutrality of perspective, that neutrality of awareness, that fact-finding, anti-agenda perspective that gets the best possible answer for the business. Not the best possible answer for Fred this week because he turned up to the meeting, and next sprint it'll be Mary that wins because she turned up. The BA function balances all these needs, all these different perspectives that are healthy perspectives, because you need all these people positioning what they need, but you still need someone and something and some role to find the balance. Part of the way we do this is we have a thing called horizons, decision horizons. You only decide as far as you can see. So at the strategic level, the vision document of an Agile project, business analysis will only be making decisions and only be specifying requirements as far as they can see. That's the overall, sorry, go back a step. That's the overall project. That's the entire Agile project, the epic. Then you have an initiative, which is the release plan of multiple sprints. I'll put all these up. We talked last week about a number of sprints being a release plan that would release macro capability, a bunch of things that all come together to deliver something that's more complete. That's the initiative. And there are decisions that can be made over what that capability needs to look like, requirement-based decisions. Then you get per sprint, which is the feature user story level. So the horizons, the decision-making horizons that business analysis will look at will be based on the release planning that any particular Agile project is working with. And you make bigger and bigger decisions as you map out those plans. So we're ready to see the synergies. Right on the hour. What are the synergies? Business analysis and service management. This is a little bit straightforward. What BA can do is improve the lives and happiness of service delivery, because with good BA, you should get better services, better designed services, better supported services, more complete, things that aren't held together with duct tape and prayers, things that will be working effectively and therefore better services and easier to deliver. Agile and BA, we actually addressed that last week when we talked about what Agile does is has a shorter decision-making cycle and therefore a shorter analysis cycle of requirements. BA is still there as the neutral party asking all the great questions, just at slightly different times and within certain horizons. And with governance, it's about certainty. Governance wants to make sure. Governance is let's make sure our strategy is actually being implemented across the organization or across IT. How do we do that? Well, BA has a role to play in enhancing that certainty, managing the risks of wastage, making sure that when we do throw some money at a problem, we've thrown the right money at the right trajectory, at the right piece of that problem, and what we're going to get as a result was worth doing. That's its contribution to IT governance. So there we go, folks. We really have, in 45 minutes, smashed through what ITBA, some of what ITBA is, does, helps.
He's good. Beautiful timing as usual.
We got some questions, Guy.
I got 20 of them. And I will start with my little spiel because I have to. But I'll go through a couple of things in chat. There's been some really good debate tonight. As Patrick says, will you just stop arguing, please? Or at least having robust discussions. I got to say, AJ has been killing it tonight in the chat. Many pithy comments. I think my favorite was something like, strategy doesn't matter, neither does governance. You can just bloody wing it and fix it 2 weeks later in your latest, iteration. But anyway, it's been lovely in the chat, and you've been fantastic, everyone in there, helping each other out and discussing. So that's really gratifying. 20 questions plus. Now's a good time to chuck in your questions about your study plans and your study goals and your dreams and all that sort of thing, because I'm going to take control of the screen and try and actually do some presenting, which is actually something I'm terrible at, and bear with me.
I'm going to stop my video.
Beauty.
Whilst you present, and I'll come back when we do the questions.
Rightio. But keep your mic on, because I've got a couple questions for you.
Sure. You're going to take the screen? I'll
take the screen very slowly. Where am I going? Zoom. I'll take the screen, share screen. This will stop other screens.
So we'll do the questions in just a few minutes.
PowerPoint
after
slide.
These important announcements.
Oh, yeah. Right. So can you see my screen, Brenton?
I can see it.
Okay. So as I was saying, I had planned on, doing a fairly unsophisticated marketing spiel in a pre-recorded little video for you, gang, to chuck on the learning page. And in general, I just tend to fluff on during these marketing spiels in the live webinars. But Brenton said we should change it, and I think it's a great idea, and I've always wanted to explore that. And we were talking about it, and Brenton said, assumptive close. We should go away from a method of just, fire hosing you with information and marketing platitudes. So first of all, Brenton, can you just reiterate for everyone, what does assumptive close mean?
Well, in this context, what I meant was that I think that a lot of our audience already understands the fundamentals of what online study looks like. I mean, especially after the last year or so. I think that the basics and the fundamentals of this is what we do and this is how it works, most people know or can get that information quite readily. I feel that people are either they know that they don't really want to study right now and they're just happy with some short courses, or really they are. And I think that choice is pretty easy for most people to make, unless they have some questions that are usually quite specific and unique to them. So the assumptive close is, let's assume they know the answer of whether or not they want something. We're not going to try and sell it to them. We're just going to say, if you really do want this, this is what we can offer you.
Beauty. Well, let's go with that. I've got a few slides here for those of you that actually don't have any of the information, and I'll just whip through them. Formal education helps. very clear reasons for it. We have great entry pathways, and heaps of different programs and heaps of different intakes and all that. Fee help is available, and there's Commonwealth supported places available this year because COVID recovery is an important consideration, particularly with regard to the grad certs. And I'm going to put this slide deck up there so that those that need it will actually have this information.
And they can click the links.
Yeah, absolutely go nuts with it. And it's interesting your position that people sort of have made that decision as to whether now's a good time to study or not. And I sort of hold that the emotional decision is quite a key factor, just from the sales role that I have also performed for IT Masters. And it's a really interesting one. So I just think that's about managing the emotional, I guess, roller coaster that is making a large investment in yourself, and the sort of amount or the extent to which identity or identifying with being a postgraduate student is an emotional barrier. But let's go with the assumptive close, because I'm really interested in how this will go. So that's all the stuff we normally give, and you can have it later. But I guess the important question is, what information can we provide? What is the thing that what information do you need to take the next step? Like, or as Camille said in the chat, and to maybe turn it into a bit of a BA question or study plan A, what is the problem you're trying to solve here? Does anyone?
Can I tell you what happened to me, Guy?
Yeah, sure.
Because I did the MBA in computing with you guys. So what I got with the help of one of your people there was to create a study plan. They helped me figure out which of the courses I could get a credit for, because I already had some knowledge and I already had some industry certification, and I really just had to go and get one or two other certificates here or there, and I could get credit for a couple of subjects that I didn't have to attend. So that was help and guidance. They were helping me decide which subjects, because of what I knew, and I said, well, this stuff I already know, so it'll be easy and I'll do that. And this stuff I don't know, how hard would it be? And I got all that guidance as to what these sort of subjects would do and be, because I was doing subjects that weren't mine. So I had to get information and guidance as to all the other stuff that I didn't know. And I got all that advice, and then I got a plan that said, well, what sort of intensity, how many do you want to do a session? And not everything is offered every session. So there was the calendar mapping that I got help with, but there was also, well, what are other people studying? What are people putting on their resumes? What sort of specialization? One of the things that I learned was that if I did a 4-unit project management certification, Cert 4, I could then matriculate that and convert that into the MBA. So I end up with 2 certificates. I didn't know any of that. And these are all my questions that were unique to me. And I only learned it because I had a conversation with someone from IT Masters.
Yeah. And I guess that's the best part of the sales role, is you get to chat with people and actually find out what the objectives are, and then match it to it. That's my favorite thing to do. And in fact, we've got a couple of questions in the chat, so feel free to chuck your questions and your experiences in there. We'll start with Christina's. What is the process of assessing the level of credit for prior experience? So the simplest way is to do an eligibility assessment. Go and click this link later. I won't go to the web page. Essentially, it's just a web form. It's particularly relevant for some of the more tech-focused people, just because of the subjects that we run. But there's heaps of management certifications and governance certifications. I'm thinking COBIT 5 or COBIT 19 now. You've got all the project management certifications, Prince 2. Essentially, you just load up all of the things you've ever done and just dump it on us, and then we'll say, yes, it's good for a credit or not, because there's some very well sort of trodden paths. And if it's not on our list of something that's been assessed, we just go and assess it. It might take a little bit of time to do it, but you can start with other subjects that you definitely won't get credit for as you go. And that's the sort of thing that we can sort of tailor according to your needs, because we can sort of say, oh, I'll avoid the subject A, B, C, do X, Y, Z, and you're likely going to get credit for A, B, and C later. So if you click on that, you can just chuck everything that's ever happened to you in there, and we'll do an assessment for you. And often it can be sort of, I guess, the clincher. If you like some people say, someone in the chat earlier said, I don't think I can commit to a whole master's. If you can get, the 50% credit, which is the maximum available from either previous postgrad study or your industry certifications, then, or from indeed these short courses, which is something you can do. If you complete 3 of these short courses, you get a course credit. Then it might be a far more attractive option and a better investment for you, or something that sort of feels more attainable. Now the chat's going ballistic and I'm going to struggle to keep up, but maybe chuck your points in the Q&A. I did see something else from Katrina, who'd like more HR units and marketing, but doesn't necessarily want to do a full master's, as they already have a master's in public health, already a teacher, business in health admin. So this is a perfect example of someone that doesn't want to do the full master's because they've already studied before and they just want to fill, specific gaps in knowledge or skills. That's the beauty of a grad cert. You can pick and choose your subjects. If the actual course that you want to do doesn't have the subjects that you want it, or doesn't have all of the subjects you want, but has a few, that's where we come in. We can sort of negotiate with course administrators, course amendments. You say, well, here's a very good reason why this makes sense. It still ticks off the key learning outcomes of the course. They've got these credits outstanding and they've got this sort of experience, and we just sort of paint the student in the best possible light, hoping to get the required outcome, and then we sort of negotiate an outcome. It really is sort of, where we come in. Henry, if you're looking at the chat, or feel free to chuck a few my way, but I'll just go through the Q&A now. I'm sorry for everyone that's already posted in the chat. And then, Brenton, I guess the question I have for you is when you want me to stop yammering on and go to the actual BA questions. It's like, I'm happy to keep going for as long as people want, but it's just a question of what you're after and what you think is best for this course.
Well, what if we do some of the BA questions now, and that will give you and Hannah time to have a look through the courseware questions that have come in.
Yeah, right.
And you can distill those and then come back to them.
Yeah, okay. I'll stop me share, and then we'll just go. We'll just go with it. Alrighty, let's go to the BA questions. One set of questions that I wanted to sort of group together was the difference between business analysis and business architecture. And I think, part of the answer will involve an answer to the question, where does the role of BA sit within a business structure? Does the BA, is the BA best served if they're sitting outside of the organization and sort of a hired gun, or should there be like a full-time role?
That second part of the question will depend upon the size and scale of the organization. It'll depend upon how much work they have for a BA. If it's a full-time job, then it's often going to be a full-time internal role. If it's not, it may well be a hired gun. Often you'll find that organizations that outsource project management will outsource BA. BA might be associated with the project management office sometimes. BA might be associated with strategic management sometimes. It might be more associated with executive because it's more associated, especially if you look at architecture, then that's where everything interconnects and looking at how the structure should be. So that's going to be typically more of a strategic position and might have a strategic view. It might be more in the realm of portfolio and program management. It could be in a value stream management, the high end of value and benefits delivery of an organization, because that's what it's connected to. It's connected to benefits delivery. It is a role that ensures that project-oriented value is achieved, because the business as usual is normally handled by line management and operations, etc., not by business analysis, unless there's a problem to solve or a big thing to change. that's when BA will often get more involved. So it tends to be more associated with the temporary endeavor concepts that apply to portfolios, programs, and projects. And that's typically what it's connected to.
Thank you. Rightio. Brad Smith put in a question. What about 6? Can you please just clarify that one? Rightio. Sebastian has also asked about the BA short course going to come back at some point. Sebastian, was it there and it's not there now? Could you please also clarify that one?
Is it because the methodology changed that we based it on? Is that why?
No, I tend to try and keep them up regardless of whether they've been updated, just because I think there's always going to be nuggets there. It might just be some other weird issue.
Okay. It's still valid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we have all sorts of old CCNA courses as well, and they, we make a new one every time that updates. Eugene asks, should a BA ideally be an outside? So yeah, this is the question I was going to, but Eugene also asked about the benefit of perhaps having a fresh eye and keeping them away from local politics. Do you think it would be more or less useful for them to be an outsider to deal with particular issues with requirements, and the opposite is true for some others?
I think it certainly can, but if you have an external BA who is appointed, it will depend a lot on where their mandate and authority comes from, as in who appoints them. Because if they're appointed at a junior level of the organization, they will inherit the power that appointment gives them. And that might not allow them to solve the political challenges that they'll come across. So when you have external BA, the more senior the authority can come from for that appointment and the mandate that they can be given, the more effective they'll be at dealing with that. So that's why, you often will want to have, at the very least, the buy-in and support of the CIO or the CXO, whoever it is, at that level, supporting, yes, let's appoint a BA, let's do this, and have that as the starting point, that person, that decision maker, is accessible to the BA if needed. And that's their stick that they carry.
Beauty, thank you. B. Klabots, someone who I didn't ask a question of last week. Does this mean, or does this lecture mean, you only call a BA when there is a problem to solve, like a doctor? You're sort of discussing whether the investment is worth it.
So it does start with the assumption that things aren't perfect, because it goes on the assumption that if there's no pain, there's no change. The investment in change is measured against the cost of the continued suffering. And if there is no continued suffering, there isn't going to be a change, there isn't going to be an investment, and so the BA doesn't have any questions to ask. So there is that assumption. You do have a value stream perspective that says, well, we're never resting on our laurels. We're always looking for the next opportunity. And that's where the innovate perspective can come from. The innovation from within the BA process is usually going to be innovative ways to solve the problem. But the BA isn't normally going to be looking for a problem to solve. Well, if they're bored and need a job to do, then maybe they will. But generally, that's not the way they perform their work. There'll usually be a mandate, which will often come from executive, that says, we might not be doing this the best way. Well, let's get a BA to look at that for us. And the answer might be, yeah, you're doing great. Nothing to solve here. But now you know that for sure. That's expensive. Not all organizations can do that. Not all of them are willing to do that. But yeah, it's generally, in my experience, it's a reactive function.
Thank you. Ray asks, please give some tips about avoiding paralysis by analysis.
Prioritization.
Prioritization.
That's the mechanism, because paralysis by analysis does not necessarily, well, it can, but in my experience, it does not primarily come from overanalyzing specific things too much. It comes from overanalyzing too many things. There are always some things that are going to warrant that little bit of extra analysis, but when you do it too much to too many things, that's when it can be a time sink and a resource sink. So that's where prioritization of understanding that not every requirement needs the same level of analysis means that you can prioritize and restrict the trade-off of, well, if we get this wrong because we didn't analyze it to death, what's that going to cost us? What's the likelihood versus the cost of analyzing it to death? Because if we do that with everyone, every requirement, we'll never get this document done. We'll never get the project off the ground, and that'll have its own set of costs and risks. So you prioritize which ones actually warrant the higher level of analysis. And on the other ones, you got to be prepared to say, right, let's stick a fork in it. It's done. Let's move on. And then you come back only to the ones and redo the ones that something tells you that's going to be a problem. Risk-oriented, perhaps, is another way to look at it.
Thank you. Hannah, any or any BA questions we'll have to cut off from now, just otherwise we won't get to the study ones. This is interesting from Don. We seem to be labouring over the BA role, whereas the activities of BA would seem to be relevant in many places and as a subset of many other roles.
Absolutely. Yeah, and a lot of organisations don't have an official BA. You know, I've seen this job performed by project management, right? Because the project manager, if a lot of this doesn't get sorted out, they're the ones carrying the can on what goes wrong. So sometimes you get responsible people that are collaboratively trying to solve these problems. It doesn't have to have a role and a label and a business card. It doesn't necessarily need that. It's a function. It's a role, and it can be worn by someone of any title and any situation. And I absolutely agree. It is something that is generally ubiquitous. What happens and where it goes wrong is that it isn't thorough in a lot of circumstances. And because you need to have a certain level of experience of what are all the questions that need to be asked so that you don't miss one. It's the unknown unknowns, right? The thing that you don't have, because you've got a particular perspective, you don't have a broad enough opportunity to find the thing that you really wished you'd found. And that's the benefit of independent roles in it. But absolutely, it often happens piecemeal and often good enough or better than it would if you didn't do it at all. It's like project management. You can get by with very limited project management, but it's, you know, some is better than none, but good is better than some.
Well, related question. Generally, what are the overlapping skills between PM, BA, IT governance, IT architecture? That's from Satish.
The overlapping skills would be the fact that they all have to work with multiple stakeholders. Everyone has to be able to manage different ideas, different agendas, different needs, requirements. There's a great deal of information gathering. So there's a lot of analysis of information. They both have to understand a variety of models because the project management needs to be able to deliver what's been modeled. So they need to be able to interpret, and they need to be able to manage the interpretation of the specification requirements to turn that into a thing. So there's a lot of overlap in the skill sets, and there's a lot of parallel, and it absolutely works best when the BA and PM are a team and they're working towards the same holistic objective. So in that sense, yes, there is a lot of knowledge because the PM might not be creating the requirements catalog, but they certainly have to understand it and work with it.
Camille asks, can you please, or it's more of a statement, can you please emphasize that definitions or a glossary are worth their weight in gold? And says this is evident in the open chat tonight, as one person's BA experience is very different to another person in another type of organization and role.
True. And when you're dealing with the multiple perspectives of different stakeholders as a BA, one of the first things you do is to create a glossary of terms. What do we mean by this word? What do we mean by that? And that'll be different for every organization, but you just need to be able to have some way to agree that that's what we mean by that in this circumstance. So that for everyone to get on the same page, it has to be written on a page. You know, it's not a throwaway phrase to say, get on the same page. Well, what page? Let's start with the glossary. I definitely agree with that. It's a very important starting point.
Interesting proposition from, proposition. Haitham Barker, culture would eat strategy for breakfast. What about business analysis? Does
Yeah, it
yeah,
gets
go ahead.
beaten up a lot by culture.
Okay.
Yeah, it does, because it's unnatural for all of the other stakeholders to listen to the BA. It is absolutely against what their instincts and their culture and their perspective and everything is telling them to do. Everything that their own internal self is usually telling them is that they need to look out for their concerns because nobody else will. And until they get to a point where they can truly trust a BA's neutrality and the BA's ability to take their concerns and carry them with appropriate weight, then they're going to defend their own outcomes and their own priorities. So there is always a degree of pressure for individual stakeholders to bring their own perspective and champion their own perspective. And that means that, you know, culture of, well, this is how we do it. This is how it should be. This is how it always is. This is us, has a lot of weight behind it, a lot of momentum, and that can be very difficult for a BA to work around. Often in that situation, the only effective pushback that the BA has is money. It's often a situation where the BA is not going to convince somebody that, you know, the cultural habitual methods are not the best. It's going to be something above that that says, you know what, this is cheaper, this is more valuable, this is better value. We're going to do it this way now. You know, get on or get run over. And that's what tends to happen in organizations when they have to get tough with culture. And that only works temporarily, right? Or in small doses. Peter Drucker was the one that said that, I believe. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. And it happens to be a.
Thanks. Several questions about different types of analysis or analyst. Could you please comment on the main differences or if there are differences or if these are subsets? Requirement analysis versus IT business analysis.
So requirement analysis is a subset. Requirement analysis is a component. It's a piece of the activities that happens within IT business analysis.
Thank you. We've got product analyst. Naveen asking, with product-based teams getting popular in enterprises, will product analyst role take over business analyst role in the future?
Only in the same way that a project manager has a role even when you have a portfolio or a program manager. It's a level of horizons. So the horizons question, what's a product manager's horizon? Well, it's going to be within that product. And whenever that's adequate, that's the role that you need and that's what's going to work. But when the decisions are strategic and you are needing to compare and compete amongst multiple products, you're going to need a different perspective. And that may or may not be viable or effective from an individual product stakeholder because they're going to have a product-oriented perspective. So it's the horizons and the scale question that you need to look at. And if an organization is big enough to have individual product analysts, then they're probably going to have a business analyst perspective as well. Although I do think that there's a growing new industry arising with strength, which is the customer experience analysis from the product perspective. So you've got the product analyst who traditionally has been looking at it from the internal perspective, but now you're seeing this blurred line where product champions, product analysts, product managers are looking at it from the customer experience and balancing the two. And that's just another stakeholder that they're having to bring into the picture. And I think that does kind of lend itself to the more specialized role of what do the customers of this product really think? How do they really work? How does their mind tick? And what does that tell us about how we need to deliver the right customer experience for that product? That's just more of a specialty role.
Got a very interesting couple of comments from Hugh. I believe they're linked. And I believe this is a quote from a supplier after the output was due. And he's asking you for thoughts on what the supplier has sent. While the framework allows us to focus our development resources during the sprint period, due to the nature of software development, delivering change at the end isn't always possible.
So if the emphasis is on the change, then, and it's a simplistic answer and I'm making some assumptions, but delivering the product has never been enough to warrant and ensure its adoption. And whether you're delivering a waterfall product that just lands on everyone's desk and suddenly the world is different, or whether you're delivering an agile product which has incremental change, you need all of the human-oriented elements of change management to maximize adoption and to maximize and embrace the change. So it doesn't necessarily matter whether it happens to be sprints and agile or whether it happens to be on a waterfall basis. In the same way that I said before that agile is the same decisions that waterfall is, just at a different time and a different order, the same thing applies to change management. You have just as much change management in an agile release. It's just at a different time and a different order. And my assumption is that that might be something that was overlooked, or it isn't working well, or isn't necessarily performing the way it needs to. Just because a customer comes out of a feedback at the end of a sprint that says, yeah, I like these features, that doesn't mean they're going to start using it next week. There's all that secondary change of their processes, change of their documents, change of their habits, training, all those sort of things that need to happen as well.
Thank you. We'll finish with 3 questions. And then I really strongly encourage people who are, somewhere along the line of, a study plan, drop it in the Q&A and we'll flesh it out if you're comfortable with it. And Hugh's just added, it's actually a small feature where they redeployed a resource without delivering the change and advising, but thanks for the insight.
Okay.
And also I'm interested in feedback on whether you think, the assumptive close is a good idea for these short courses. Is it the next step that you need information on, or do you actually need to be convinced that it's a good idea? Michael Goulding asks, can a BA analysis be done in 2 parts, say a pilot trial, with a pilot trial at halfway?
Yeah, I've seen that happen where business analysis gets to an initial business case decision of go or no go, where it's a question of, well, do we go the next step and invest the next level of resources to get the rest of the answers? You can test the waters. You can have a BA process that comes in and says, do we really have a big enough problem to be worth going all in on this and figuring it all out? And yeah, you can have that first step that says, well, let's do a pilot. Let's do really small scale. Let's get some answers and do it with just a small handful, or you could not do anything, but just get some initial decisions and understanding, or you could go further, but just with a small piece. That's a lot to do with how you're managing your risks and how you're managing your investment, your resources, your benefits realization. How do you manage your money in that sense? And sometimes that's a requirement, and BA totally flexible to work with any of those. There'll be some adjustments. It won't be the standard formula, but then there's no such thing as a standard formula. Despite what the BABOK would have us believe, it's unique to every circumstance.
Thank you. A couple of quick questions about POPIT. How does the POPIT model fit within Agile and Lean methods?
So POPIT tells us where to look. Agile and Lean tell us how to look. And what I mean by that is that POPIT is a way of categorizing the kinds of questions and investigations and analysis that we need to do, mainly to make sure that we don't miss an area. It's like POPIT says, well, there's people here, right? So make sure you look at that parameter. Make sure you look at that influencing force. Don't miss that. And that's the purpose of a model like POPIT that says there's all these bits, look at all of them. And whether you're looking at it from an Agile or Lean method, that's going to tell you when you do it. It's going to tell you to what depth you do it at what point. Lean is going to be saying, well, you don't have wastage. You want flow. You want to make it happen just at the right time. You're having that workshop just when you need it, so that you get the answers off that just when you need it to make use of it. And that's a lot of what Lean and Agile are going to say when you do it. The POPIT model is just a way of deciding what questions to ask, what investigations to actually have.
And implicit within that, does it sort of account for culture and risk appetite? As anonymous attendee asks, how does POPIT give regard to culture and risk appetite?
Risk appetite, I'm going to switch back to the the model here, right? So when you look at the organization, that's when you will get details like, whoops, I just moved that. That's when you get details like the risk appetite. That's when you get the nature of the organization and its structure, it's the way it interacts, the way it makes decisions, and that will include risk appetite. When you look at culture, that's going to be the people, because process is how they're meant to do it, and the way they actually do it or want to do it is based on the people, and that's the element that you're going to look at. Their motivations, right? How do they want to do it? Well, let's take that into account, because we might need to either embrace that or correct that. So that's where those bits will come out of the POPIT model, because it is very broad. It is, you're dividing the entire company up into only 4 pillars.
Beauty. And we'll finish the questions with Seshadri. I've worked with some amazing BAs who were good with eliciting requirements, documenting technical and functional specs. And most of these BAs came through from a development background. What other backgrounds could make a good BA for an Agile project?
That's a good question, actually. In my experience, I would say that it's been similar. That you're obviously talking about a role who is bridging gaps, and the hardest direction to reach into is the technical. And that is the hardest environment typically to understand when you don't yet understand it. And so in my experience, some of the most successful BAs have come from people who have a grounding in a technical understanding and have a strength in that, but have broadened themselves to fully understand the marketing and management perspective, the financial perspective, or what other perspectives exist. And they have made themselves omnipotent in that regard from that direction. I have known BAs that have gone technical, but there has to be an interest in the technology. There have to be people who enjoy learning that, because there is always a lot to learn. And if you look at the question asks what other backgrounds are going to be effective, I would say that you absolutely benefit from an analytical background. Now, I've seen an auditor have become a good BA, because an auditor is all about analysis. It's all about details. It's all about making sure. And that's not to say that anyone from that background would work, but I do think what you would most struggle with is a background that has been so used to make it up as you go, fast and loose, fly by the seat of your pants, wing and a prayer. That is not BA. And BA is typically there to stop that, or to stop the damage that can cause. And so any background that's able to maintain discipline and yet diplomacy, it's going to be a good starting point.
Thank you. Hamish came from a networking and infrastructure background. So there's another story.
Right.
All righty. Well, that's all of the BA questions. There's not much activity. Hannah's answering an anonymous attendee question about scholarships and credit from previous studies, both of which are possible. Certainly credit from previous studies, but unless anyone's got any specific questions or sort of, I guess, case studies for me to play with in terms of the study plan analyst stuff, I guess we'll just call it a night there and signpost for next week, Brenton, given we've kept people pretty long anyway.
Why don't you put a forum post as a thread for anyone that has questions about study that they are willing to post publicly?
Yeah, great idea.
And the answers might be of interest to others. So anyone who's not sure, that'll give them a place to look at what other people are asking about and the answers you give them.
Yep, absolutely. That's good. Yeah, so, it's apart from these short courses, it's the best part of my job. So I'd be very happy to do it.
So there'll be a thread, folks. If you have questions and you want to see what the topic, the discussion is, check that out.
Essentially, it's like, yeah, I'd love to give it a try. See what we can get away with.
Next week, it's governance, IT governance, making sure, implementing strategy. That's what we're all about.
Are we actually doing the thing?
Well, yeah. How do we know? We're going to do that next week. That's what we're going to talk about. Thanks everyone for your fantastic comments and contributions and questions along the way. It's been fantastic.
Yes. And thank you, Hannah. And thank you, Brenton, as ever. Have a lovely week.
Thank you, Guy. And this is my fun part. This is what I love to do. And I'll look forward to seeing you all again next week. Until then, that's all from me for now. Thank you and good night.